I'm Charlie Henson. We're in Covington, Kentucky on Friday, October the 28th, 1999. And I am interviewing Nicholas Kepf.
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 Nicholas Kepf.
Kepf.
Yep.
And thank you. And so I appreciate you letting us come today. And I'm going to start out first, if you'll tell me your full name and your parents' names and sort of your family history from birth. Just real short.
My name is Nicholas F. Kepf, and I was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, 1921. And my parents, on both sides, mother and father, were born in Austria-Hungary, and they came over to the United States before World War I. And they were married in Cincinnati, and they had 3 sons, Nicholas, Frank, and Peter. And all 3 of their sons served in World War II. One in Navy dive bombers. The other's brother was in the General Hospital. And I served with the 12th Armored Division about 3.5 years. About 3 years.
Tell me your mother and father's names.
My father's name was Frank Kepf. My mother's name was Anna Schimmel.
Tell me about your high school years and let's feed up into how you got into the Army.
Well, I was drafted, but I was wondering why they didn't call me. So I went to the draft board, which is number 13, and asked them why I wasn't being drafted, because my buddies were all gone. So they said, well, I don't know why, but we'll find out. Next month I was drafted. That's how I got into the service.
How old were you and what year?
I was 21 years old when I went into service.
Okay. Where did you go? Where did you do your basic training?
My basic training was in Camp Campbell, Kentucky. Now it's Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And that's where I took my basic training. I was with the 44th Armored Regiment at that time.
Tell me about your training. Was it what you expected, or how was it different? And give us some details of what that training was.
Well, I didn't expect anything, because I had no idea what they were going to be teaching me. And most of it was, I'm an expert on a .45 pistol, and the carbine, I was a sharpshooter, and went through the regular formations, drill, going through the little field they had for explosives. You didn't notice that, but you'd go through this field, and they were firecrackers, and they threw firecrackers, and it made it sound like it was a real bombardment or a real firefight. And also we had to crawl under barbed wire with machine gun fire going over our heads, and through a tear gas chamber. So that was our basic training.
Tell me about the tear gas chamber.
Well, what we had to do was put our masks on, go in, open it up, get some of the tear gas so it could come into your mask, and then you leave it out and suffer. And of course, it wasn't too much suffering. They let you out after a while, and you just breathe fresh air. It wasn't really anything serious.
What position did you hold in Tennessee maneuvers?
At Tennessee maneuvers, I was with Company E, 44th Armored Regiment, and I was assistant gunner in the tank, and I got hurt on maneuvers. One of the turrets fell on my hand, and of course nothing, but I got hurt, and I had to go to the hospital a little bit. And so after I was I completely recovered, I went through Camp Forest, Tennessee, to get back to Camp Barkley. And at that time, I was notified I had to be a guard for prisoners, and they were American soldiers. And I didn't know at the time, but they're very, very dangerous prisoners. In fact, the weapon that I received was a sawed-off shotgun, and just one man. And they told me that they were very dangerous and not to leave them more than 3 or 4 feet out of my sight. And that's what I did.
So this was at Camp Barkley?
No, this was at Camp Forest, Tennessee.
Oh, and were they military men?
Yes, they were military. They were, I don't know what charges they had against them or proved, but they were the criminal element of the Army.
So when you went over to Barkley, you continued to be an MP?
No, I
Okay.
wasn't an MP yet.
Okay, tell me how you did that then.
All right, then I got to Camp Barkley. I noticed that we were getting mosquito netting, and anything that would be valuable for you as a soldier for the South Pacific. Having a brother who was a Navy dive bomber in the Pacific for 2 years, I knew about what was going on there. And I didn't want any part of it. So I thought, well, I don't want to stay with the 44th Armored Regiment anymore. I'll try to see if they'll accept me for the MPs. And the company commander said yes, it was fine with him if I could get on with him. When I get there, I meet Lieutenant Finch, and he wanted to know what I could contribute to the MPs. And I said, well, the only thing I know of is I speak German. And he says, that's great, and we need people who speak German. And so I was taken up by the MPs, and that's how I got in.
Did you learn German as a child or in school?
Yes, I was in Europe when I was 5 years old, 1937, 16 years old. And my father and mother used to take trips over there. He was rather successful. So we'd go back to see my grandmother and grandfather. And so naturally my parents spoke German to me at home, but I would answer in English. So I had a fairly decent knowledge. In fact, the OSS approached me, and they had an interview with me, so I asked them, what is this all about? And they said, well, we would train you. We'd go to England, we'd train you, and after a while we'd parachute you into France. And he says, now I want you to read this German book. It was really a first grade German elementary book. And he says, read it. And of course, I couldn't read it. And all of a sudden I got a blank. And so he says, okay, he knew. The colonel knew. And I said, I'm sorry, sir. And he said, that's all right. And then he dismissed me. And but with the MPs, the reason I knew German was because my parents were German. And so I didn't have any problems there.
Now
And I also guarded the German prisoners at Camp Barkley, plus all the town patrol work in between. We'd get an average of 25 prisoners, and usually the way I worked it, I called a non-com out. I never let them know that I spoke German. And I put the non-com, what they call the Unteroffizier, I put him in charge. And I tell him, now, if you lose any, you're responsible to me. And we never had any problems. They were always there. But what impressed me the most, the way they sang in formation and whistled, they were terrific soldiers. They were Africa Corps. And they were, well, they were spread all over Canada, you know, that was my problem there with the German soldiers. They were too impressive.
Oh. Were you at Barclay when we had some Germans escape? Tell me about that.
Yeah, they did. They escaped, and they always tried to go to Mexico. And of course, the border guards would catch them as soon as they tried to get across. It was not really a big thing because the security was lax. They worked in the warehouses, and sometimes men took too many, like 30, 40. And there was no way you could, really guard 30, 40 prisoners. And so some of them would escape. But I heard, I'm not sure, that the FBI killed some of them, and others they brought back. But that's about the only thing I know about that part. Of course, I never had to go after them. The border guards and the FBI, they handled all that, even the Secret Service.
How many prisoners of war how many were at Barclay, Camp Barclay?
How many what?
Prisoners of war?
I don't have any idea how many prisoners. Quite a few of them.
Okay.
But there were quite a few of them. I know there were at least a couple of thousand. Yeah.
And so they just worked they were given jobs and they just worked on
right.
base?
They would work in warehouses and whatever job was necessary. Most of them could do it because they were skilled people.
When you think about MPs, were the MPs, were there different MPs with each battalion or unit, or how did that happen?
Well, the MPs were only 88. We had 88 MPs, and that was a platoon. And that's all we had for the 10,000 or more soldiers in Abilene. There were other soldiers. Well, we had the authority over them too, but we were more interested in the 12th Armored. Now, if there was any criminal act by any other, so we would arrest them. And we were attached for logistics to division trains, but we were also directly responsible to the general. And that's the way the TO read, Table of Organization. That's what we called it. Now they call it.
Were you under General Brewer?
I was under Brewer in Camp Campbell, but at Camp Barclay, I think it was General Green, then General Allen.
Can you describe those men to me? What they were like? You would have been...
Well, what I could see was the outside of them. I couldn't see the inside. And I had some experiences with I'm not going to say the name, with Major, he was a battalion commander. I can't tell you which battalion because you could find out. And he was speeding on the highway that went from Abilene to Camp Barclay. And there was an Air Force base on that highway. I think it's still there. And anyway, I was on patrol, and I went after there were two Jeeps speeding. And of course the first one I could catch was the one in front of me. I wasn't going to go around him, and so I pulled him over and got out and asked I saw it was an officer, so I saluted him, and then I asked the driver for his driver's license. And the major says, "Don't give it to him." Well, that never happened to me before. And I said, "Sir, I want his driver's license." He says, "You go and catch the other ones. Why didn't you go after them instead of this one?" "That's because you were in front of me, and that's the only one I could catch." And so he said, "The driver don't give him any information." I didn't need it. All I did was walk around the front of the car, and I had all the information I needed. And so he gave me a explicit, is that what you call it? And so he drove off. I couldn't get any information, nothing. So the first thing I did, went back to Lieutenant Finch. He was the officer of the patrol and explained to him what happened. I said, now sir, do you want to do anything about it or not? He says, we sure do. Provost Marshal interviewed me, and I gave him the report. And next thing you know, they pulled up in a Packard. They said, the general wants to see you. So I went up, and I had my chair out in the front, chairs in the back for some of the staff officers and some of the officers of the division. And of course, I'm standing there sweating. And next thing you know, the general pops out from around the corner. He's got my report in his hand, and he says, tell me about it. And he was reading my report while I was explaining, and he says, thank you, soldier, that's all I want to know. And so I did about face and left, and waited down the Provost Marshal's Packard. And Provost Marshal come down. He says, I'll let you know in a couple of days what happened, because he didn't like it. So a couple of days later, I find out he was fined, reprimanded, and he didn't get his rank until almost half of the war was over. So I don't think he did that anymore.
Tell me about the different responsibilities you had. First, let's go to Barclay, and then we'll go into Abilene. The responsibilities that an MP had on base, and then how that transitioned into the community of Abilene and Sweetwater and the towns around.
Okay. Most of our authority or responsibilities, we had certain buildings that we had to guard. Well, I did very little of that. I think once or twice, because most of my responsibilities, like I said, was in Sweetwater. I was mostly on patrol all the time doing criminal work, really. I had a partner by the name of Oliver, and we did most of that. We did town patrol almost every other night, sometimes more. And now I went to Breckenridge and Sweetwater, and we also got hazardous pay for that. A lot of people don't know that. And even in the 12th Armored, men don't realize it. And and our job was to protect the soldiers. That was the first responsibility we had, to make sure everybody was safe. And if they got hurt, to make sure they got treatment. And if they got a little bit too tipsy, make sure we got them to the bus and make them go back into camp. But mostly was to see that they were having a good time, and not try to put our face in front of them all the time, and try to, more or less stay in the background but watch. And there was just one incident in Abilene where two soldiers and their girlfriends, they were in a storefront, which was very prominent in those days. It was a storefront, and they had like baseballs, and they would, like you see in a circus, they would throw baseballs at the dolls. Well, this soldier was sitting on it. The owner, he called because this soldier wouldn't get off. So we went in, and this boy was from West Virginia, Jim Long, and he was a big boy. I had a big partner that time. And as he walks in, one of the girlfriends jumped him and started choking him. And, got on his back and just choking him. And so the first thing I did, I saw the fellow sitting there. I grabbed him and put his arm in back of him, and I told him, I said, now you tell your girlfriend to leave him alone, or else your arm gets busted. And he let him, so I locked them all four up, put the two GIs in jail, got them some Clorox, heavy Clorox, to sober them up, which they did.
How does Clorox work?
It was the odor and the strong, and they had been drinking heavily, and And so next thing you know, it all came up, and then they had to mop it up, and I just left because I had more work to do. But that was another incident in Abilene.
Did you take them back to Barkley, or did you take them to the
No,
town?
they stayed in jail. Now, if they behave, you know, if they get out of line a little bit, or they get angry at the MP, well, you have to overlook a lot of that. And just so they do what, they may be angry, as long as they do what you tell them, then you're all right. But really, the 12th Armored Division men really were really good kids, really. And we didn't have that much trouble at all with them. We had more trouble with troops from Camp Walters, Texas, which was an infantry camp. And we had a lot of problems with them. But 12th Armored, really, I never had too much with them. Just a little bit of drinking, or maybe girlfriend problem. And otherwise, there wasn't any problem. No criminal charges, you know, like robberies or rape and things like that. That didn't happen.
You mentioned your hazardous pay when you went to Breckenridge, Sweetwater. How much extra did you get? And was it per?
$6 a day. That was a lot of money for us. $6 a day. But Breckenridge, the only problem we had there, my sergeant was Sergeant Wall, his staff sergeant. And so I go up, he says, Nick, go up in the room, see everything's okay, because they gave us rooms up there. And I go upstairs, and I see a black man. He's putting beer into the bathtub, and he knows it's the MPs. I said, what are you doing? He says, I'm filling up the tub for you. I said, tub of what? He says, beer. I said, get that thing out of here. Get it all out of here. And what they were trying to do is soften us up. So I told Sergeant Wall, he says, you mean he had beer in there? I said, yes, he did. He says, I'm glad you got rid of it. But these are little things, you know. Sweetwater, I don't know if I should say this or not, but I was with the police at that time in his cruiser. And there was a GI, you know, same old story, a girl. And of course I didn't really look at it that way, but the police officer did. It was a Texas girl, and there's maybe a, you know, Yankee boy. And so he had a spotlight on him, and he says, what do you want to do? I said, what do you want to do? He knew that, and he says, well, let's get them both out of there. And it was in like a schoolyard or something, and we put him in a cruiser, and we kept him long enough for the girl to get home. And that wasn't too much. But usually things, now when fights broke out in Breckenridge, there was a place called Slaughter. It was a saloon. And I would tell them, and the new boys that came in, you know, that never worked a town patrol in Breckenridge. I said, there's a saloon up there called Slaughter. I said, and you'll find out exactly that's what it means. And we had a lot of problems with it, but otherwise it was okay.
Was it because they drank too much, or was
That's
it
all
a
it
non-acceptance
was.
of the?
No, it wasn't. It was because they drank too much. They had to accept the Army. Everybody, you know, regardless of what, you were in, and you had to accept it. And the only way you got out was in a rubber bag. And unless there was mentally something wrong with you one time or another, and then they would discharge you. They called it a Section 8.
I have heard stories, and I don't know if this is true, that there was some commotion or a riot or something in Abilene. Do you know anything about that?
I heard that when the MPs came in at Abilene, that people were, or somebody was taking pot shots at them.
Pot shots in words or guns or?
Guns. Yep. It just lasted I don't know, a couple of days and it was all over. But I don't know if it was a resentment of a certain culture of people because the Army was coming in. But they did have troops there before we were there. So I can't understand why, they couldn't accept that. I heard at one time that Abilene had over 60,000 troops. So, this would seem strange and anyone would want to do anything like that. In fact, the provost marshal and the general, they had really all the police powers. That was wartime, see, and they could close up anything if they wanted to. They had all the power. The general did, but of course he never would enforce it. He let the civilians, but if he had to, he could have.
How was Breckenridge and Sweetwater different in Abilene behaviors or anything, considering that Abilene was dry and the others weren't?
Well, I'll tell you what it was. It was the MPs, more MPs in Abilene. That was every night MPs. On the weekends, the MPs only went to Breckenridge on weekends, and the same way in Sweetwater. Number one, it was too far away. They didn't have the transportation. Over the weekend, they would take Saturday and Sunday. So, there was a lot of difference. Maybe not in the culture of the two cities, but it was the opportunities that they had. Abilene was dry, and just like I said, I caught the bootlegger out there on one of the side streets and took him to the detectives because I didn't want to bother with them. And these were civilians, and they came out the door. They met me outside. Hi, how you doing? So I know, well, next time. And but like in Breckenridge and Sweetwater, they were small towns, smaller towns, and they had whiskey and beer, and but I don't know how to say that, but the atmosphere was different in those two towns than it was in Abilene. Now, I think the people in Abilene also were more classy, more high class. And these were little country towns in Texas.
Okay, tell me how you, as an MP, what was expected of y'all when it was time to pack up Barkley and go to Shanks? What was there special responsibilities?
Well, yes, most of the American soldiers that were in training preferred to go overseas before staying in the States, because they most of the soldiers, Chicken Little, I'll just use the word Chicken Little in the Army, and they preferred, Americans prefer action. They just don't want to sit in a camp and go through the same monotonous drills and duties that they have to, KP and all that. They would rather go to war and get it over with and come home. And that was their attitude. And we were glad that finally we were going to go overseas. And nothing against Abilene or Camp Campbell or, people of those cities didn't even come into the picture at all. No. We were just glad to get going and get the thing over with.
Tell me about your personal experiences going across country, getting to Shanks, and then the movement over to Europe.
Yeah, okay. I think we left on a Santa Fe, and we got Pullman. And I do know we had to keep the curtains drawn for quite a while, so we couldn't see out. And not only that, so people couldn't see in, know what was on this train. And I do remember we crossed over at Windsor, Michigan, from Texas, we went to Michigan, into Canada, all the way up to London, Canada, then came back down by the Niagara River and into New York at Camp Shanks. And we had Pullmans. I forget how long the voyage, how long the trip lasted, but we were treated well. We don't have to do any duty either.
When you talk about, I hear they wanted to keep it really hush-hush, and y'all weren't supposed to know where you were going, and, like pull the curtains and stuff like that. What was the situation in the United States at that point? For those of us who can't understand that, explain why they did that.
Well, number one was secrecy. They didn't want the Germans to find out anything if they could keep from it. And but I did forget one little thing. When we made one stop on this trip, I forget which state it was in, but it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't know if they were putting something on the train, maybe rations to feed the soldiers or what, but we stopped. And women must have known that this train stops there every night or every other night, or maybe they even were informed of it, because they were women they were American women. They knew they were patriotic. And they had sandwiches galore, all kinds of things for us, and they gave us free. That was one of the nice things. But like why, I would say that is the most important thing, is you never let your enemy know what you're going to do. You never let him know what kind of equipment he got. You try to keep from him knowing anything about you or your equipment. And that's why I think we went all the way up to Canada, or it could be that there was so much traffic on the other lines going in, let's say from Cincinnati into New York, or that was one of the main port of embarkations out of the States. Not the main one, but one of the main ones that was going to Europe.
Okay, what were you still just had your MP duties on the ship when you went to Europe? Did you go on which ship did you go on?
I went over on a Marine Raven. That was a 10,000-ton Liberty ship, and it was terrible. We were 15 days on the ocean, and every time the ship would go up and come down, wham! And we were about 5 high in hammocks, and it was miserable conditions, really, very bad. And of course, you go into the bathroom, water would be going this way, the boat went, and then the water come back, and the guy standing on the end got a face full, and it was terrible.
Tell me what it was like as you were marching up to that ship, your Liberty ship, and walking up the gangplank. Gangplank. Tell me what it was like to be 21 years old and to be experiencing this.
Well, I thought I had a duty, really. My brother was over in the Pacific. My other brother was in. And I'm being the oldest, and I'm still in the States. I felt like, well, it's my turn now. And, well, we were a different generation. And we were more patriotic, and we had more sense of responsibility to our country. And we just did what we were supposed to do. And of course, marching up to the ship, we had to carry our own barracks bags. We were loaded down. I forget how many pounds, plus our weapons. And that was very difficult. That was a long walk to get up to the ship. And of course, when we got on the ship, we laid everything down, and that was it. But really, I think our attitudes were, let's get it over with. It's been a long time.
What weaponry did you take were you given as an MP?
I got a 45 automatic, and I had a grease gun. It was like a machine gun. Those were my TO weapons. I never did have a carbine. Never. That's all I had.
Okay. What did you, when you were on the ship and in England, were your MP duties, did they change any?
MP duties in England were different, much different. We landed at what I know now as Southampton. When we left there, I want to say one thing. When we landed, it was early in the morning. Of course, just like the British weather, half rain, it was terrible. And 3 o'clock in the morning, there stands the Salvation Army. Their band, hot cocoa, coffee, donuts. And they gave us a little kit. They were wonderful. And I never forgot them for that. And then we went to Tidworth Barracks, which
What was in the kit? Excuse me. What was in the little kit?
to sew on buttons, a little scissor and everything. And then we went to Tidworth Barracks, and that was an old English cavalry camp. And that's where we set the Provost Marshal set the CP up. And from then on, most of the time I did town patrol in Salisbury, England, and in Andover. But most of my work, I was leading convoys into Swansea, England, and into the English Channel. I was taking one company at a time, just in the tank battalions, and they would practice fire in there, and I'd take them back. At other times, we set up a 3-day schedule, which was sent down from the Eisenhower's headquarters, try to capture, or should I say apprehend, AWLs in England. And if you had a pass or a furlough of any kind, let's say October 31st was the last, none were issued for November the 1st. And then we knew anyone that was on the street was AWOL or something. So we did capture a lot of them, and we picked up a lot of stolen vehicles. Some of them were even tanks. But see, a lot of those things were sold. And we set up one roadblock right outside of Salisbury, and no one was supposed to be on the street. This was at night, and I was standing up on a little hill, and I could see or hear whatever it was coming up the road. So the fellows down below said, "This vehicle's going through the roadblock." Well, when they did, I fired, and all I saw was sparks, and it was a motorcycle, and he was on the side. So then when I went down there and picked him up, here he was a messenger for the British. Luckily I missed. So that was one incident there, and really that's about all I did in England. Just road patrol, things like that, and the convoy, that was the big thing.
Did you have, y'all were in England for how long?
How
long were you in England?
About a month and something. About a month and something.
Okay. It appears that You worked with a different kind of soldier, the kind of soldier that, you know, the Army really wasn't real proud, or how was that? Did that make you see the Army differently by having to, you know, work with the criminal side of it, or did you see them just sort of as kids, kind of, you know, guys just letting off steam, or?
Most of that, right.
Okay.
Most of it was letting off steam, being macho men, and but the American character is different than a European. And like British soldiers, very seldom did I ever see them intoxicated. French soldiers, I seen a lot of that. And German soldiers, a lot of it. The British were one of the best, and Americans were had quite a reputation too. But as an example, we thought we had to go to it was like a USO, British only, and we didn't know that. We thought there were Americans in there having a little fist fight. So we went up there, my buddy and I forget who this fellow was now, and we walk in, and the lady comes and says, what's the problem, when she sees American MP? And I said, do you have a fight going on here? She says, no. I said, oh. Well, it was just about lunchtime, and I see these sandwiches up on the counter. And I said, oh, I'd like to buy one of the sandwiches. And she says, no, I'm sorry, we can't sell them to you. I said, why not? She says, you're American soldiers, and you have plenty of hamburger and cheese, and she says, all our soldiers get is lettuce in their sandwich. And they were for sale. I said, oh, I'm sorry. I said, I'm sorry, and I just walked out. See, this was one of the little jealousies. Americans got all kinds of money, you know, but they didn't. The British didn't have any. That was all that was a problem. The same way with the rest of the European troops. And but I had good experiences in England. I liked England, really. I thought it was a beautiful place.
As an MP, and being an enforcer of rules and laws and stuff, how did you prepare yourself for that? Did you have to separate yourself from the other soldiers, or, I mean, what did you think inside your head?
I didn't have to do that. They did it for us.
Explain that to me.
There's a lot of ill will among a soldier that was drunk one time. And of course, I can't remember ever arresting anyone except, like I said, there was 2 soldiers there, or I think there was one in Breckenridge, but they just didn't cozy up to us. I don't know. I think it was because we had quite a bit of power, but you better not misuse your power, because you get in trouble. And it's just like a line came in between you and them, but you're a friend. But if somebody got drunk, then he became your enemy. See, so you had to be careful, and you just couldn't just bully your way around. And like I said, you keep your face out of their face, and try to lay back a little bit and give them a little freedom, and everything's fine.
So did y'all's friendships in the Army kind of stay with?
They were MPs.
MPs.
You were separated. You were separated even as an MP. You didn't live with the rest of the troops. You had your own little 88 men there, and then you have your own social. You socialize with them, and that was it.
We're going to change our battery on this machine, so we're going to stop real quickly. I'm sorry, that's why. Okay, now we've gotten you. Let's get us over to Le Havre. If there was anything that you remember real specifically about the journey across the channel, and then let's get into La Havre and kind of get on into Europe.
Well, the cross, we were on an LST, that's landing craft tank, okay? But there was, I can't see where there was anything exceptional to the trip. It was just a little rough, but that's it. However, when we got close enough to Le Havre, when I looked at the destruction at Le Havre, because the British went in that way, I looked at a fellow, I said, you know, I said, they're not punching or throwing cream puffs at each other. I said, this is going to be tough. And
describe Le Havre that made you to say those words.
Well, the first thing was I saw the bunkers on the beaches. They looked like houses. They even had curtains in them, you know, painted. And of course, from when you're coming in an invasion force, you can't. You're so hyper that you actually see a curtain there and you see a house, and the destruction houses just leveled from the bombardment from the Air Force, most of that. And what I was a little concerned about was there was an old man, I could see him because we were close enough and high enough in the book. He was walking through the ruins and he stepped on the mine, and that was the end of him. Old people were still coming back to try to find their belongings like you would at a hurricane, and you know, people they want their belongings, and he took a risk and he lost. But I could tell that there was a lot of fighting going on there, and it was not nice. But I didn't take part in the invasion now, but this is what I saw after we came in and into Le Havre, and that was in November, I think, or something like that. And so the D-Day was long gone, and it had an impression on me, I'll tell you that.
What were those inner emotions that you were feeling? What words would you put on those emotions as you saw that?
Well, the first thing I was thinking was, I don't want to die. I want to try to come out of this if I can. And the second was, I wonder what my parents would think if I get killed. How will they take it? And of course, I didn't have a hatred in my heart then yet. And when I saw the civilians, I felt sorry for them. And I had an idea, I didn't know, but I had an idea of what they were going through. And I really felt sorry for them. And those were most of my feelings were towards my family. How will they take it? And what if I come home with one leg off or amputated? And you know, things like that. That was my concern. And would my dad live, my mother live long enough that when I came home that I could see them again? Things like that. See, it's mostly your family until you get into combat, and then you have another family.
Tell me about the days leading up to the first combat that you experienced, and what was that like building up to that?
Well, the first one I saw as an MP, I was taking the papers up to G2, and that's the first thing that war really came close to me, and that was in Benning, in Lorraine, I think it was. And I was following this Red Cross, he was a medic, really. There was a doctor in it and a driver. And they were about 50 feet in front of me. It was early in the morning, and next thing you know, I hear this explosion. I see the tire flying off up into the air. It must have went up at least 50 feet, and the Jeep just stopped. And I slammed on my brakes because I didn't know if there was another one there or not. And I ran over to the Jeep. By that time, other troops came too. And the doctor was dead, and the driver was, shrapnel. But I couldn't stop anymore. There were other troops there to take care of it. And I just drove right to G2. And I thought, now, I'm going to go back that way, and I'm going to see where this hole is and see where they're putting these mines. Because we were still learning. We were still learning. That was the very first thing. Very first one. And I wasn't too much involved in that. I just happened to go by. But the next one was at, if I can think right, was at Herlisheim. That was bad.
Can you explain what your role at Herlisheim was and the MP's role there at Herlisheim? You were an MP?
Yeah.
So tell me about your involvement.
Oh, in that?
Did the
Okay.
did the MP have a different role than some others, or what?
Yes, they did have, absolutely. My experience there at Herlisheim, I was ordered to go to Herlisheim, pick up 45 SS prisoners. They were from the 10th SS Panzer Division. And had a T4 drive me, and we went all up what they call Purple Heart Highway.
I
And
never heard that. Where was that?
That was in outside of Herlisheim, between Bischweiler and Herlisheim. And so first day I didn't have any problems. And but I did hear that they were going on alert to retreat, because we fought troops that were really great, and they had other troops with them. And so I couldn't pick up my prisoners. And number one, there was talk, what are we going to do with them? Are we going to send them back or just keep them here permanently? So I went back, and the major says, go on out, see if we can get them today. And when I went back, we got under machine gun fire. I mean, everything was red around us, in front of us. And I told the driver, I said, now don't go at the same speed. You slow up, go fast, so they can't just pick you up. So we did. And then when we get in there, where we were supposed to be, the Germans had moved up over 1,000 yards that night. And here we're right in amongst the infantry. And of course we're really drawing fire by them. And an officer yells, I get that GD Jeep out of here, you're drawing fire on us. So the driver, he put it in reverse. And I never went so fast in all my life in reverse. So I don't know what happened to him, but I eventually jumped out. And when I did, they were firing at me again. And I could hear them going right alongside my ears. And in France, they had on the corners of the street, or maybe even on the lot, they had these piles of manure. And I said, well, there's only one chance. And I dove into it and just laid there. And then I could hear, and I didn't realize I was that close to the end of the street in Herlisheim, and the fellows were peeking their heads around, you okay, Nick? You okay? You okay? And I said, yes. Well, when the firing stopped, I got up and ran. They didn't even open up anymore. And I felt myself, I guess I was okay. And they asked me if I was hurt. I said, no, I'm all right. But I don't know what happened to the Jeep or the driver. I don't know what happened to him.
Would that have been the hardest time that you ever faced in the war?
No, even, I think most of my problems,
That's okay. That's okay. I'm famous for making people cry, so if that helps. That's okay, you can kind of get it together.
Mm. There's other times that, you know, it's almost the same thing all the time. You know, that you see the guys. But, can we go beyond her time?
Yeah. I do want to ask one thing. With the things you saw, how did you survive that? How have you survived what you saw?
There had to be a God. There had to be a God. And most men will tell you that, I believe. And you only survived because you were supposed to be here. You had other duties that were going to be performed by you before you died, either good or bad. And as an example, there was a prisoner of war camp that, you know, we had about 400, and German. They knew that I spoke German, these prisoners, and one of the doctors came up and said, I think we had just gone by Dachau. I was in Landsberg and Dachau, and so we were beyond that. I want to get beyond that, and this doctor came and said, we're having problems in our PW, among our PWs, that their gangrene setting in their arms where they were wounded. See, they weren't getting any medical attention. And they want to know if there were 6 doctors in that, among the 300 prisoners. And they want to know if we could set up just a temporary hospital so they could, you know, take care of those wounded. And so I told Sergeant Wall about it, and he says, well, let me go and see what the major says. Okay, the major said, go ahead. So we got an ambulance in from Munich, Germany, which wasn't too far away. And they're called Schwesters. The nurses are called sisters, really. And so they sent one of them up, and I was on my way to pick out a location. I was going to let her pick it out because she had more experience than I did. And as we passed this cloister, cloister is a house where the nuns, Catholic Catholic priests live. That's in Europe. Here in the United States, they have different accommodations for them. So I see these 4 French ambulances, and I told her to stop. I said, there's something wrong here, that the French army shouldn't be here. We were to meet them, but up further northeast. And so I said, I got to go and see what's wrong. So she pulled over where they were, and so I got out and I asked the French officer, he spoke German. He said yes, and which are usually bilingual over there. And I said, how come you're in American territory? He says, well, I got inmates from Dachau. And I thought, my goodness, still? And he says, I said, well, what do you got them here for? He says, I can't get into the cloister. I said, why not? He says, a priest won't allow me. I said, does he know you got inmates out here? And he says, yeah. So I said, okay, I'll take care of it. Knocked on the door. The priest come to the door, and I said, we got some Dachau inmates here, and I want them in here. They shouldn't be out there. He says they can't come in. I said, now wait a minute. They will come in. And I just lifted up my machine gun. And I said, either they come in or you're not going to stay around much longer. And when he opened the door, opened the door, there was about 50 German soldiers in there. And of course, that's when my heart went down to my feet, because that was a surprise. And so I acted like I didn't see him, really. And I told the French to bring in their inmates, or well, yeah, they were concentration inmates. And so as I walked by the German officer, I said, "Are your men armed?" He said, "No." Well, I took his word for it, because I'm really going to argue about that. And meanwhile, the nuns had been preparing soup, chicken rice soup, for the German soldiers. So they were hiding out there. And so they took the concentration victims, and they took them in, and they fed them. Well, they had little cups, and they would grab that from the nuns and try to drink it, just drink it down. Of course, they had to stop them, otherwise they'd be dead. It would go right through their system. And as I walked out, I told the German officer, I said, we'll send a truck up for you. I said, don't go out on the street. I said, because the war's over for you. It's almost over. Don't get anybody killed. And they waited until the truck come and got them. So that was okay. And the priest, he let them in after that. But that was one of the good things I did.
Can you, do you mind telling us about your reaction when you first found out or first saw the concentration camps? Can you kind of tell us about that? Do you mind telling us about that?
Well, the first thing you see are bodies, like logs. And of course, the sight of them, not everybody got into the camps themselves, see. But I saw the bodies stacked up, and I saw in the yard. See, the German soldiers either tried to get away or they got away. And this is about all I could see in there. And in Landsberg, I believe that this woman that was down in the basement was a resistance fighter, probably from England, parachuted in, and that's what I saw. She was bald-headed. Germans pulled her hair out, little bit by little bit, tortured her, but at least she was alive. And of course, when you see them, you just can't believe it. Their arms. If you see people with cancer, except their stomachs don't protrude like the inmates do in the concentration camp. It's a bad sight. It's not funny.
So during this time, you were still patrolling, you were still taking...
No, you don't patrol that. In combat, we didn't patrol.
Okay, so you took you were in charge of prisoners and getting them to camps.
I interrogated them. I interrogated a lot of prisoners. In fact, in one of the first combat engagements we had maybe 30, 40 prisoners. And one of the guards said, "Nick, this German soldier wants to talk to you." I said, "Oh, okay." So I was always nice to him. That's why I got information. And so he said he wanted to talk to me alone. He was what they call Obergefreiter at PFC. So I said, "Fine." I said, "Would you like a cup of coffee?" "Yes." "You want a cigarette?" "Yes." And I said, "Where are you from in Germany?" He said, "The Polish corridor." And I said, "You're a medic?" He says, "Right." I said, "Now what do you want to talk to me about?" He said, "I want to show you, while I was treating German prisoners that were wounded, how they were setting up the traps for the American tanks and the American infantry." And I said, "Fine." That got the map, and he pointed it out to me. He says, "This is where they are, and this is where their little wire, what do you call them, wire booby traps were, and because when they walk through, they hit them and they explode. And I said, fine. Got them over to the provost marshal. I guess he informed the companies that were going through there, and no problems. Just because you're giving a guy a cup of coffee. But at the same time, we had an SS prisoner, and I couldn't get anything out of him. And so I said, okay, a couple of guys were guarding him, and I said, okay, lay down. He laid down, and I took a shovel and shaped him out, like we're going to bury him. And I gave him the shovel. I said, start digging. And I waited and waited, let him go for a couple of hours. And he was only about 19, 20 years old. He was a tough one. And so he laid down, then they do it again, and finally I thought he would break. He didn't. And I did everything I could. I even punched him a couple of times, which was nothing unusual if he wanted to get information. And so finally I said, okay. I said, you're a brave man. And I said, you want to shave? I gave him my razor and I gave him a cigarette. And then I put him back in with the prisoners. Well, we just had stables then. We took a brewery and we put the prisoners in there. And I had to salute that guy. He was brave.
We're going to have to close down a minute because I have somebody else. This isn't long enough. I need 2 or 3 hours. But anyway, there's so many things that I need to know from you. But since we have to close it down for the next one, tell me what you learned about yourself during World War II.
Well, I did learn to be reliable and to be a perfectionist, because if you made mistakes, you were gone. And also depend on my buddies, and also how much I miss my family, my parents, and my brothers. And really, I have to say something else, how rotten some of the politicians are. Men who are old men, like I am now, running, putting these young men in, killing them off on both sides, British, French, German, American, Russian. And it's the young people that die, it's not the old people. And I think it's unfair because most of the people in the world, they get along, but the politicians don't. And that's what I found out about myself. To really appreciate that I was even alive, and glad that I got home.
If you were to leave one message, you have a family, you have children?
Yes, I have a son. I have one that was killed in Vietnam, and I have another one who's in the Persian Gulf. They were both officers.
Your family, your grandchildren, your descendants, if you were to leave something for them to remember, something that you really want them to remember and to know, which you might have already told them, what would it be about your World War II experience?
Well, if I'd left them anything about my war, the only thing I could tell them was, here's a flag, here's a bullet, and that wouldn't be telling them anything. What I would have to do is try to motivate them for their patriotism to their country, try to do the right thing. That's the things that I've motivated my grandchildren with. And the war was my problem. I don't want them to forget it. I want them to remember what our generation did, because we are the finest generation. And that's what I would do. I'd motivate them to get an education, do the right thing, respect the people around you. Those are the kind of things I want to leave my grandchildren, and not everything about World War II. I may leave them a bullet, a flag, or something, but like I told you, my things are up at VMI. And my sons, they have their own memories. He served in the 3rd Armored in the Gulf, and my other son, the one that's dead, was in the 4th Infantry. And they have their own memories and their own things to do. And but I did motivate them all to go to college and get a good education, PhDs and things like that. And that's what I left my kids.
What did you do after the war? What was your career after the war?
I retired as a safety, I can't even think now, as a, not a safety, I drew a blank on that one. But I was a safety officer first, and I retired very nicely. I'll find a word that I have to say, but I can't find it now.
Okay.
You caught me on that one.
Okay. Well, we're going to close right now, and I appreciate you letting us talk to you so very
Okay.
much. Thanks.
Can